Westerns didn't fade away, they were changed. So what happens when an entire genre loses the very thing that made it dangerous? Clint Eastwood didn't follow that change, he pushed against it. Through the films he made and the ones he respected, a different version of the West kept surfacing. Slower, harsher, unforgiving. This list isn't just about great Westerns. It's about what Hollywood left behind. And once you see it, you won't unsee it. Tombstone, 1993. It starts like a legend, names you recognize, a town that feels familiar. But Tombstone doesn't stay comfortable for long. Beneath the surface, this isn't about heroism, it's about pressure. About men pushed into violence not because they want it, but because the world around them leaves no space to avoid it. Wyatt Earp isn't chasing glory, he's reacting, adjusting, trying to stay ahead of something that keeps closing in. And Doc Holliday doesn't feel like a side character, he feels like a warning, a glimpse of what happens when survival becomes identity. That's what gives the film its edge, because the violence isn't clean, it builds, it escalates. Hollywood often turned Western conflicts into clear battles. This doesn't. It shows how quickly control disappears. And once it does, there's no clean way back. Ride the High Country, 1962. Before Westerns became self-aware, Ride the High Country was already questioning everything the genre stood for. On the surface, it follows a familiar path, aging lawmen, a final job, a journey that feels almost routine. But underneath that structure, something far more reflective is happening. This isn't a story about victory, it's about decline, about men who can feel their time slipping away, even as they try to hold on to it. What gives the film its weight is that quiet awareness. There's no attempt to glorify the West or preserve its legend. Instead, it shows something fading. Honor begins to feel outdated. Violence no longer carries meaning, it simply exists. The world these men once understood is changing, and they don't have the power to stop it. That's exactly the kind of storytelling Hollywood would later move away from. Because it doesn't celebrate the genre, it slowly takes it apart. Its audiences expecting clear heroism are left with something far more uncomfortable and honest. Eastwood's later films echo this same tone, that lingering sense of endings, of legacies slipping through your hands. Because Westerns were never just about gunfights, they were about what remains after. And this film understood that long before the genre itself was willing to admit it. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. At first glance, it feels iconic, stylized, larger than life. But look closer, and something darker begins to emerge beneath the surface. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly doesn't present heroes, it presents survival. Three men moving through a brutal landscape, driven not by morality, but by need, greed, instinct. There's no higher purpose guiding them, only opportunity. Eastwood's Blondie isn't noble. He's controlled, calculated, detached from the chaos around him, yet fully part of it. He operates in a world where morality isn't fixed. It shifts depending on what keeps you alive. And that ambiguity is what made the film feel so different when it first appeared. Because traditional Westerns depended on clarity, clear heroes, clear villains, clear justice. This film strips all of that away. What remains is uncertainty, a constant tension where no one can be fully trusted. Even the war unfolding in the background isn't treated as heroic. It feels chaotic, pointless, a reflection of how fragile structure really is when everything begins to collapse. This is where the genre started to change. Not toward fantasy, but towards something more honest. And that honesty wasn't comfortable. Hollywood would later imitate the style, the music, the scale, the imagery. But what it couldn't recreate was the emptiness at the core. Because once certainty disappears from a Western, what's left isn't legend, it's confrontation. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. This isn't a Western that moves quickly. It lingers, waits, forces you to sit inside, moments that feel almost too long. And that's intentional. Because Once Upon a Time in the West isn't trying to entertain you, it's trying to dismantle your expectations. Every character exists in a space where motives are unclear. Even the violence feels delayed, like something inevitable rather than immediate. And that delay creates tension Hollywood often avoids. Because modern storytelling fears stillness, it fears losing attention. This film does the opposite. It holds stillness long enough to make you uncomfortable. That discomfort is the point. The West here isn't romantic. It's transitional, something fading, being replaced by something colder, more controlled. And the characters feel that shift. They're not shaping the future, they are being erased by it. Eastwood's later films carry this same awareness, that the West wasn't a place of permanence. It was temporary, fragile. Hollywood eventually turned Westerns into something cleaner, faster, more accessible. But this film resists that completely. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't guide you. It simply unfolds and leaves you to sit with what it reveals. The Searchers, 1956. It looks like a classic Western at first. Wide landscapes stretching endlessly. A clear objective. A man searching for something taken from him. Everything feels familiar, structured in a way audiences recognize instantly. But beneath that surface, The Searchers reveals something far more unsettling. Ethan Edwards isn't a traditional hero. He's driven by obsession, by a kind of anger that never resolves into justice. And the film doesn't try to soften that. It doesn't guide you towards sympathy or justification. It simply allows his behavior to exist, unchanged and unfiltered. That's what makes the experience uncomfortable, because it challenges a core expectation of the genre that the central figure is meant to be admired. Instead, Ethan feels unpredictable, shaped by prejudice, by trauma, by something deeply unresolved. The closer the story gets to its goal, the more uncertain his intentions become. Hollywood would later move away from this kind of character, because complexity like this doesn't offer reassurance. It doesn't give the audience a stable perspective to hold on to. It forces them to question what they're watching and who they're supposed to trust. Eastwood's later films echo this same discomfort. Characters who aren't designed to be liked, only understood. Figures who carry weight rather than clarity, because the West was never clean. It was never simple, and the Searchers understood that long before the genre began to smooth those edges away. What remains is a story that feels familiar at first glance, but becomes more difficult, more uneasy, the longer you stay inside it. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. There's no urgency here, no sense that anything can be changed. From the beginning, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid feels like a story already decided. That inevitability is what defines it. Garrett isn't chasing Billy with conviction. He's following through on something he doesn't fully believe in anymore. And Billy isn't running to survive. He's moving through a world that no longer has space for him. This isn't a battle between good and evil. It's a quiet collapse. And that's what makes it so different from what Westerns would later become. There's no attempt to build excitement, no effort to create a triumphant ending. Instead, the film leans into something heavier. Regret. Distance. The realization that time has already moved on. Eastwood's films often return to this idea. That violence doesn't resolve anything. It only marks the end of something that was already fading. Hollywood, over time, shifted away from this tone. It replaced reflection with momentum. But this film refuses that shift. It slows everything down. It removes the illusion that actions still matter. And what's left is something far more difficult to watch: a story where the outcome isn't just known, it's unavoidable. The Wild Bunch, 1969. Violence had always been part of Westerns, but the Wild Bunch changed how it was experienced, not as spectacle but as consequence. It doesn't build toward action in a way that feels controlled or heroic. It lets it erupt, suddenly, without warning, and when it does, there's no sense of order holding it together. Every gunfight feels chaotic, disordered. There's no clean choreography guiding the eye, no slow-motion heroics designed to elevate the moment. Just confusion, noise, impact. That bodies falling without emphasis. Decisions made too quickly to be understood until it's already too late. And that shift unsettled audiences because it removed the distance that once made violence easier to process. Earlier Westerns allowed viewers to stay detached. This film doesn't. It pulls you directly into the instability, forcing you to experience how quickly control disappears. These aren't men fighting for justice. They're surviving, clinging to a version of the world that's already slipping away from them. And the film doesn't protect them from that reality. It shows the cost of every action, the weight behind every choice. Eastwood's later work reflects this influence clearly. That same refusal to romanticize violence, that same understanding that once it begins, it can't be contained. And Hollywood would eventually soften this approach, reintroduce structure, make action easier to follow, easier to enjoy. But The Wild Bunch resists all of that. It doesn't guide you through the chaos, it traps you inside it. And once you've seen violence presented this way, the cleaner version stops feeling real. High Plains Drifter, 1973. This isn't a Western built on realism alone. There's something else here, something harder to define, and even harder to ignore. From the moment the stranger arrives, the town feels off. Not just quiet, but controlled, as if everyone is hiding something they've agreed not to speak about. And the film never fully explains it. That ambiguity is what makes High Plains Drifter so unsettling. It refuses to give you clarity. It withholds answers in a way that keeps shifting your understanding of what you're watching. The stranger isn't a hero. He isn't even fully human in the traditional sense. He exists somewhere between justice and something far darker. What makes it more disturbing is how the town responds to him. They don't resist, they enable. They accept what's happening, even as it becomes more extreme. That dynamic reshapes the entire tone of the film. Because the violence here isn't framed as necessary, it feels inevitable. Eastwood directed this himself, and it reflects a clear break from traditional Western storytelling. There's no moral resolution, no sense that balance has been restored, only consequences that unfold without correction. Hollywood would later move away from this kind of narrative, because it doesn't comfort the audience. It doesn't reassure them. But this film leans into that discomfort completely. It creates a world where nothing feels stable, where justice doesn't resemble justice, and where the past doesn't fade, it lingers, reshaping everything that comes after. The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976. Revenge stories are common in Westerns, but The Outlaw Josie Wales doesn't treat revenge as victory. It treats it as survival. From the beginning, Josie isn't chasing justice in the traditional sense. He's moving forward because there's nothing left behind for him to return to. He isn't driven by glory. He's driven by loss. And that loss doesn't fade. As the story unfolds, it stays with him. It shapes every decision, every reaction, every moment of silence. The film doesn't let you forget what he's been through. That continuity is what makes it different. Because Hollywood often isolates trauma. It uses it as a starting point, something to trigger the story, then moves past it. This film does the opposite. It builds everything around it. Loss isn't the beginning, it's the foundation. As Josie moves through the world, he gathers people along the way. But they don't feel like companions in the traditional sense. They feel like fragments, pieces of something he's trying, unsuccessfully, to replace. And that shifts the tone completely. The violence here isn't building toward a final showdown. It isn't structured for payoff. It exists as part of an ongoing reality, something that continues whether you want it to or not. Eastwood's direction reinforces that. He slows scenes down, lets silence settle, allows characters to exist as people, not symbols. This is the kind of storytelling Hollywood gradually moved away from, because it doesn't simplify anything. It doesn't offer clean resolution. It only shows movement from one loss to another. And by the end, what matters isn't what Josie has done. It's what he's still carrying. Unforgiven, 1992. This is where everything comes together. Unforgiven doesn't just challenge Westerns, it dismantles them completely. From the very beginning, it removes the illusion that this story will follow familiar rules. There's no sense of legend here, no myth being preserved. William Money isn't a hero returning for one last mission. He's a man trying to escape who he used to be. A man who knows exactly what he's capable of and wants no part of it anymore. But the film doesn't let him stay removed. It pulls him back, slowly, deliberately. And every step carries weight. Every act of violence feels heavier than it should, slower, more deliberate. There's no excitement in it, no release, just consequence unfolding in real time. Because the film understands something earlier. Westerns often avoided violence doesn't define you in a heroic way. It erodes you. It leaves something behind that doesn't go away. Eastwood directs this with restraint. There's no excess, no dramatic exaggeration. No attempt to elevate the moment beyond what it is. And that restraint is exactly what makes it so powerful. By this point, Hollywood had already shifted toward cleaner storytelling. Clear motivations, clear heroes, clear outcomes. But Unforgiven removes that clarity entirely. No one here feels justified. No one feels right. And the consequences don't resolve, they linger long after the action ends. This isn't just a Western, it's a correction, a response to everything the genre had slowly become. And in doing that, it reveals something deeply uncomfortable that the version of the West audiences had grown used to was never real to begin with. The Proposition 2005. It doesn't feel like a traditional Western, and that's exactly why it belongs here. The Proposition takes everything audiences expect from the genre and removes the comfort from it. There's no myth being protected, no legacy being honored, only brutality, unfiltered, immediate, inescapable. Set in the Australian outback, the film strips the Western down to its most basic elements: law, violence, survival, and then exposes how fragile those ideas really are. Our authority doesn't feel stable here. It feels temporary, conditional, dependent on fear more than control. The central conflict isn't about justice. It's about choice, an impossible one. And that's where the film becomes difficult to watch, because it doesn't offer a right answer. It doesn't guide the audience toward moral clarity. It forces you to sit inside a world where every outcome carries consequence. This is the kind of storytelling Hollywood rarely embraces anymore. Because it doesn't resolve tension, it sustains it. Eastwood's later work aligns closely with this tone, that same rejection of clean narratives, that same understanding that violence isn't a spectacle, it's a fracture that spreads through everything. The Proposition doesn't try to redefine the Western. It exposes what it always was beneath the surface. And by the time it ends, something becomes clear. The grit didn't disappear. The realism didn't fade. It was left behind. Something changed, and these films prove it wasn't accidental. The grit didn't disappear overnight. It was replaced, smoothed out, made easier to watch. But the truth never fully left. It survived in films like these. Now the question is, do you prefer the myth or the reality? Comment your answer. And if you want more deep dives like this, subscribe, and stay watching.